Marcus Anderson was pulled over by a police officer simply because, to the officer, a black man driving an expensive sports car seemed suspicious. The officer didn't know that Marcus owned an entire car dealership, including that very car. The aftermath of this incident will surprise even those who have seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Marcus Anderson, a 35-year-old black man with close-cropped black hair, confidently drove his bright red sports car through a scenic street in a prestigious neighborhood. His impeccably tailored dark blue suit reflected his success as a car dealership owner. Marcus felt calm, focused on the business meeting with an important client he had ahead. However, everything changed when Marcus noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. The red and blue lights of a police car grew closer. A familiar anxiety gripped his chest, the feeling every black man knows when stopped by the police, no matter how successful they are. Marcus sighed, signaled, and pulled over to the side of the road. The police car stopped behind him, filling the air with tension. Marcus tried to stay calm, though inside anxiety was building. He knew that stops like this often turned into unfounded suspicions, especially when a black man was behind the wheel of a luxury car. Approaching his window was Officer David Mills, a white man around 40 years old with short blonde hair and sharp facial features. Mills' gaze was cold and guarded, his hand casually resting on his holster, adding to the already charged atmosphere. "License and registration." Mills' voice was sharp, with not a hint of politeness. His tone suggested this was not a routine check. Marcus, doing his best to remain calm, slowly retrieved his documents. He handed them to the officer, careful not to make any sudden movements, fully aware that every action would be closely scrutinized. "Here you go, officer," Marcus said evenly, though he felt his growing frustration. He was used to situations like this, but each time it was a blow to his pride. Mills took the documents but barely glanced at them. His eyes remained fixed on the car, his suspicion growing as he examined the expensive sports car. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Mills asked coldly, still eyeing the car as though searching for something incriminating. Marcus hesitated, sensing the situation escalating. He couldn't understand what had triggered the officer's suspicion, but he braced for the worst. "No, officer, I don't," Marcus replied calmly, though irritation simmered beneath the surface. Mills shot a quick glance at Marcus, then back at the car. His tone grew more hostile. "Doesn't this car seem a bit too expensive for you?" he asked, emphasizing the last word with obvious distrust. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. This was no ordinary traffic stop. It was blatant mistrust rooted in stereotypes and bias. Officer David Mills, still holding Marcus' documents, sank deeper into his suspicions. His gaze lingered on the sports car, and in his mind, a narrative built on stereotypes was already forming. Marcus had seen it before. The officer didn't mistrust him because he'd broken any laws, but simply because he was a black man in a luxury vehicle. "Step out of the car," Mills ordered coldly. Marcus froze for a moment, but then, without a word, slowly opened the door and stepped out. His heart raced, but outwardly, he remained composed. He knew that any resistance would only worsen the situation. Now, standing next to the car, Marcus could feel the judgmental stare of the officer, as though Mills was waiting to find something that would justify his prejudice. "Open the trunk," Mills demanded, beginning a search of the car. Marcus frowned but complied, knowing that challenging the demand now would be pointless. He slowly opened the trunk, and Mills reluctantly began his search, clearly hoping to find something illegal. "What are you hiding here?" Mills asked, his voice growing more aggressive. His patience was wearing thin as his search turned up nothing to support his suspicions. "Nothing, officer," Marcus replied calmly. "This is my car, and there's nothing illegal in it." Mills shot him a skeptical look, his distrust only deepening. He searched every inch of the trunk, but finding nothing, he slammed it shut in frustration. "Something's not right here," Mills muttered as he walked around the car, scrutinizing it. "Who are you to be driving a car like this?" That question struck Marcus deeply. He took a deep breath, holding back his anger. Those words embodied everything he had faced throughout his life. Doubt about his success, his abilities, all because of the color of his skin. "I'm the owner of a car dealership," Marcus answered firmly, locking eyes with the officer. "And this car is one of mine." Mills froze for a moment, clearly stunned by what he had just heard. His face reflected a mix of confusion and resentment. Mills stood still, his expression unreadable, as Marcus delivered the words the officer clearly wasn't expecting. "I'm the owner of a car dealership." Mills' eyes narrowed, and tension filled the air as a small crowd of onlookers began to gather. Mills wasn't used to having his authority questioned, and was sure he was dealing with just another person trying to evade responsibility. But now the situation was clearly moving beyond a routine stop. "A car dealership owner?" Mills repeated skeptically, his voice sharper than he intended. "You'll need to prove that," he added, reluctantly maintaining his authoritative stance, despite his growing unease. Marcus paused, watching the officer's reaction. He was tired of the entire scene, but knew he couldn't lose his composure. He had to stay calm, even though the frustration of being constantly judged by stereotypes weighed heavily on him. "My office is just a few blocks from here," Marcus replied calmly. "If you'd like, we can drive there, and you can see for yourself." Mills hesitated for a moment. By now, the crowd of onlookers was growing, their gazes increasingly judgmental. Some had already pulled out their phones and begun recording the scene. Mills didn't like it. He knew that this could spark outrage on social media, threatening his career. "That's Marcus Anderson! He owns that car dealership on the corner. I know him," a voice suddenly called out from the crowd. It was an elderly woman who confidently stepped closer and looked at the officer, as if ending the argument. Mills froze, his face paling. He realized the situation had escalated, and he needed to defuse it quickly. His confidence was crumbling under the weight of reality. He had been wrong, and now everyone could see it. The crowd around them continued to grow. People were murmuring, and the officer could feel their stares growing more accusatory. Mills nervously adjusted his belt, feeling the pressure mount. "All right," he muttered, looking at Marcus. "Let's check your office." His tone lacked the confidence it once held. Marcus nodded, his face calm, but inside he felt both bitterness and a sense of satisfaction. He knew this moment could be pivotal. The crowd wasn't leaving. Phones continued to capture every second. Mills slowly retreated to his car, clearly understanding that the situation was slipping from his control. Marcus exhaled quietly, knowing this wasn't over yet. The truth was starting to come out, and for him, that was a small but important victory. Mills, visibly uneasy, got back into his patrol car, while Marcus returned to his sports car. The crowd was still watching, phones pointed at the police officer. Mills realized that every move he made was being recorded, and pushing the situation further could lead to a public scandal. Turning on his lights, Mills signaled for Marcus to follow him. They drove a few blocks to Marcus's car dealership. The large glass windows of the building gleamed in the sunlight, and luxury cars lined the parking lot. As they arrived, the dealership employees immediately recognized their boss. One of the managers, a tall white man in a business suit, approached them, frowning slightly, confused as to why Marcus was accompanied by a police officer. "Mr. Anderson, is everything all right?" the manager asked with slight concern in his voice. Hearing this, Mills froze. He realized that his suspicions had been wrong from the start, and now he had to acknowledge it in front of everyone. More people began to gather, dealership employees and passers-by, curiously watching the unfolding scene. "Officer," Marcus addressed Mills calmly but firmly, "as you can see, this is my dealership. This car is one of the ones I sell. Do you now understand that your suspicions were unfounded?" Mills, realizing his actions had gone far beyond reasonable, lowered his gaze. He still felt the crowd's stares and knew that any response he gave would be recorded and shared. He wanted to say something, but the words caught in his throat. His pride made it difficult to apologize, but the situation was clear. I made a mistake," he finally muttered, handing back Marcus' documents. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." But for Marcus, this was more than just a mistake. It was a reminder of the systemic racism he had faced throughout his life. He knew that this moment had to be about more than just him. It was about everyone who might find themselves in his position. Officer, it's not just about you making a mistake. It's about why you even thought this way. You looked at me, saw a black man in an expensive car, and immediately jumped to conclusions. That's a problem many people face. I hope this gives you something to think about. Mills, nodding silently, retreated to his car, knowing that any further comment would only make things worse. Marcus, watching him go, exhaled in relief. He knew that the truth had come out. Phones continued to record, and soon this footage would spread across social media, sparking discussions. As Marcus sat back in his car, he knew that this moment wasn't just a personal victory, but a lesson for everyone who had witnessed this unjust incident.